The boring daily life of a Roman farmer. The first pale light of dawn breaks over the Italian countryside, and already, our farmer is awake. Not because he wants to be, but because the rooster in the yard has seen to that. This is how it begins, every single day, in the life of Marcus, a small landowner working his few jugera of land in the 2nd century AD. Marcus rises from his bed, a simple wooden frame with rope supports and a mattress stuffed with straw and wool. The same bed his father slept in. The same bed his grandfather probably slept in too. Nothing remarkable about it. Just functional. He shares this bed with his wife, Julia, who's already stirring beside him, preparing for her own long day of endless tasks. The room is dark still. No windows, just small openings high in the wall to let out smoke from the hearth. Romans didn't really do windows the way we think of them. Too expensive. Too complicated. So Marcus and his family live in a kind of permanent dimness, even during the day. He pulls on his tunic, the same tunic he wore yesterday. The same one he'll wear tomorrow. Roman farmers didn't have closets full of clothing. Most owned perhaps 2 tunics total, one to wear while the other was being washed. This one is made of undyed wool, rough against the skin, practical. It reaches to his knees and is belted with a simple cord. Over this, on cold mornings, he might wrap himself in a cloak, but today the air is mild enough. His feet find his calcei, sturdy leather shoes that are already worn thin at the sole. He'll need to visit the cobbler in the nearby village soon, but that costs money, and money is, well, money is always the problem, isn't it? Julia is already at the hearth, coaxing yesterday's embers back to life. Fire was precious. You didn't let it go out if you could help it, because starting a new fire meant striking sparks with an iron and flint, and that took time, time that could be spent doing any of the 1,000 other things that needed doing. She feeds the embers with dry twigs, then small branches, building it up slowly, carefully. The house smells of smoke and earth and the faint sourness of fermenting grain. Not unpleasant, just the smell of life. The smell of every Roman farmhouse across the empire. Marcus steps outside into the courtyard. The air is cool, fresh, carrying the scent of dew on grass. This is the best moment of the day, really, before the heat, before the work truly begins. Just this quiet moment where the world is still waking up. His farm is small, about 7 jugera, which is roughly 4.5 acres in our measurements. Not large. Not tiny. Just enough to feed a family if the gods are kind and the weather cooperates and nothing goes catastrophically wrong. Which, of course, something always does. But that's farming. That's life. The fields stretch out before him in strips. Some planted with emmer wheat, that ancient grain that Romans have been growing since, well, since forever. Others with barley. A small section with beans and lentils, because you rotate the crops, you let the legumes feed the soil. His father taught him that. His father's father taught his father. This is knowledge passed down through generations, not written in books but embedded in the rhythm of the seasons. Most of Marcus's neighbors work similar plots, and many of them don't even own their land. They're tenant farmers, paying rent to wealthy landowners who live in Rome or other cities and never set foot in the countryside. Marcus is fortunate. This land is his. Barely. The taxes are crushing, but it's his. He walks to the small barn where his ox lives. Just one ox. A strong, patient animal with brown sides and a perpetually bored expression. This ox is worth more than almost everything else Marcus owns combined. Without it, he can't plow. Without plowing, he can't plant. Without planting, well, you see how it goes. Morning, old friend, Marcus murmurs, running a hand along the ox's flank. The animal doesn't respond, just continues chewing hay with that slow, methodical grinding that oxen do. The ox will need to be fed and watered before the day's work begins. Marcus forks hay into the manger, hay he cut and dried last summer, stored carefully in the barn's loft. Everything is connected. Every task in one season affects the next. Roman farming is an endless cycle of preparation and maintenance and survival. Julia appears in the doorway with a bowl of pulse, that thick porridge made from emmer wheat that serves as breakfast, lunch, and often dinner for Roman farmers. No exotic spices, no honey, just grain boiled in water with a pinch of salt if they have it. She hands him the bowl, still warm, and he eats standing up, leaning against the doorframe, watching the sun climb slowly above the hills. This pulse, this simple porridge, this is what built Rome. Not the exotic feasts of the wealthy with their dormice and flamingo tongues, but this. Plain grain. Eaten by millions of farmers across the empire, day after day, year after year, century after century. He finishes the bowl and hands it back to Julia. She'll wash it later, in the stream, along with everything else. For now, there's work to do. The sun is higher now. Time is passing. And Marcus has fields to tend. Marcus walks toward the fields, his hoe resting against his shoulder. The wooden handle is smooth from years of use, worn down by his own hands, and his father's hands before that. The iron blade at the end is precious. Iron tools had to be maintained carefully, sharpened regularly, because replacing them meant a trip to the blacksmith and coins that Marcus didn't always have. He reaches the wheat field first. The plants are coming along, green shoots pushing up through the dark soil, standing about knee-high now. It's spring, and if all goes well, he'll harvest in early summer. But if all goes well is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Marcus kneels down, running his fingers through the soil between the rows. Checking. Always checking. For weeds, for pests, for any sign that something is going wrong. Roman farmers didn't have pesticides or chemical fertilizers. They had their hands, their eyes, their experience. And they had manure. Ah yes, manure. Let's talk about that for a moment. Because Marcus spends a significant portion of his life dealing with manure. The ox produces it. The few chickens scratching around the yard produce it. And all of it is carefully collected, mixed with straw and plant waste, and spread across the fields. This is how you keep soil fertile. This is how you keep crops growing year after year on the same land. Romans understood this deeply, that what you take from the earth, you must somehow return. Marcus had spent weeks this past winter spreading manure across this very field, working it into the soil with his hoe, preparing for spring planting. Backbreaking work. The kind of work that makes your shoulders ache and your hands crack and bleed. But necessary. Always necessary. He spots a few weeds creeping up between the wheat stalks and begins pulling them. One by one. By hand. This is how weeding works when you're a Roman farmer. No herbicides. No shortcuts. Just you, the earth, and endless repetition. Pull a weed. Move forward 6 inches. Pull another weed. Move forward 6 inches. 4 hours. 4 days. For a lifetime. The sun climbs higher, and Marcus feels sweat beginning to form on his brow. The day is warming up, as it always does. He pauses, straightens his back with a slight groan, and looks across his land. In the distance, he can see his neighbor Lucius working his own field. They'll help each other at harvest time, that's how it works. You can't bring in a wheat harvest alone, not quickly enough. So neighbors form informal partnerships. I'll help you bring in your grain, you'll help me bring in mine. No contracts. No payments. Just the understanding that in a world this hard, you need each other. Marcus returns to his weeding, but his mind is already moving ahead to the tasks that await. After this field, there's the barley to check. And the vegetable garden near the house needs attention. Julia mentioned yesterday that the cabbage was being eaten by something. Probably caterpillars. Which means he'll need to spend an hour picking them off by hand, one by one, dropping them into a bowl to be fed to the chickens later. Nothing is wasted. Even pests have their use. The Romans had a saying. Festina lente. Make haste slowly. And that's what farming is, really. You can't rush the seasons. You can't force crops to grow faster. You simply do the work, day after day, and trust that nature will cooperate. Usually it does. Sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, well, you survive on less. You make do. You endure. By mid-morning, Marcus has finished weeding one section of the wheat field. Not the whole field, that would take days. Just one section. Tomorrow he'll do another section. The day after, another. This is the rhythm. Endless, incremental progress. He walks back toward the house to get the ox. It's time to plow the far field, the one he left fallow last year to let it rest and recover its fertility. Roman farmers typically worked on a two-field system. You plant one field while the other rests, then you switch. This way, you never completely exhaust the soil. It's not perfect, but it works. It's been working for centuries. The ox is ready, patient as always. Marcus leads it out of the barn, the animal's hooves making soft thudding sounds in the dirt. He attaches the plow, a simple wooden device with an iron plowshare at the tip. The Roman plow wasn't sophisticated by later standards. It didn't turn the soil over completely like medieval plows would. It just scratched a furrow, breaking up the surface. But it was enough. It was all they had, and it was enough. Marcus guides the ox to the fallow field. The animal knows the routine, they've done this together for years. He positions the plow, takes the handles firmly, and makes a clicking sound with his tongue. The ox leans forward, the muscles in its shoulders bunching, and the plow begins to move, cutting through the earth with a soft tearing sound. Back and forth across the field they go. Marcus walking behind the plow, the ox pulling steadily, neither fast nor slow. Just steady. The furrows form in neat parallel lines. This is meditative work in its way. Repetitive. The same motion over and over. The creak of wood, the scrape of iron on stone when the plowshare hits a rock, the heavy breathing of the ox, the sun on his back. Hours pass this way. The sun reaches its zenith and begins its slow descent toward the western hills. Marcus's arms ache. His legs ache. His back definitely aches. But the field is perhaps a third plowed now. Progress. Real, visible progress. He stops to let the ox rest and drink from the bucket of water he's brought. The animal drinks deeply, water dripping from its muzzle. Marcus drinks too, from his own water skin. The water is warm and tastes slightly of leather, but it's wet and that's what matters. Roman farmers didn't drink much wine during the workday, despite what you might think. Wine was for the evening, for meals, mixed with water in the proper way. During the day, it was water. Plain, simple water. Sometimes mixed with a little vinegar to make it more palatable, a drink called pasca that soldiers and workers favored. But mostly just water. He looks at the sun's position. Perhaps 2 more hours of good light left for plowing. He'll use them. Every moment of daylight is precious during the growing season. There's always too much to do and never enough time to do it. Marcus clicks his tongue again, and the ox returns to work. The plow cuts another furrow. And another. And another. The field slowly transforms from rough ground to worked soil, ready for planting. This is the life. Not dramatic. Not exciting. Just steady. Endless. The same tasks performed the same way by millions of farmers across the Roman Empire, from Britannia to Syria, from Germania to North Africa. All of them rising at dawn, working their small plots of land, fighting the same battles against weeds and weather and exhaustion. And tomorrow, Marcus will wake before dawn and do it all again. Because the crops don't care if you're tired. The seasons don't wait for you to feel ready. The work is simply there, waiting, always waiting. The sun is lower now, casting long shadows across the fields. Marcus unharnesses the ox and leads it back to the barn. The animal will need feeding again, more hay, and perhaps some of the barley mixed with chaff that Marcus keeps for this purpose. Oxen were working animals, yes, but they needed to be kept healthy, kept strong. A sick ox was a disaster. A dead ox was, well, that was something Marcus tried not to think about. He runs his hand along the ox's side, checking for any sores or injuries from the harness. Everything seems fine. Good. One less problem to worry about. He fills the manger with hay and makes sure the water trough is full, then closes the barn door and turns back toward the house. The smell of cooking reaches him before he enters. Julia has been busy while he was plowing. She's managed to bake bread today, not the fine white bread that wealthy Romans ate, made from carefully sifted wheat flour. No, this is dark bread, made from whole grain flour that still has all the bran and germ in it. Coarse. Dense. It'll sit heavy in your stomach, but it's filling, and that's what matters when you've been working in the fields all day. Roman farmers ate bread as a staple, but the bread-making process was labor-intensive. Julia had to grind the grain herself using a hand mill, 2 circular stones, one on top of the other, turning the upper stone round and round while feeding grain into the hole at the center. It took perhaps an hour of steady work to grind enough flour for one day's bread. Just one more task in the endless list of tasks. Marcus washes his hands and face in the basin near the door. The water is cold, drawn from the stream earlier in the day. It feels good against his sun-heated skin. He dries himself with a rough cloth and enters the house. Inside, Julia has set out the evening meal on the simple wooden table. There's the bread, still slightly warm. A bowl of beans cooked with onions and herbs from the garden. Some cheese, hard, sharp-tasting cheese made from the milk of their neighbors' goats. They don't have goats themselves. Not enough land to support them. But they trade, some of their grain for some of the neighbors' cheese. This is how communities work. how they've always worked. And there's wine. Finally, wine. Marcus pours it into a clay cup, then adds water, roughly 2 parts water to 1 part wine, the way it should be drunk. Romans thought drinking undiluted wine was barbaric, something only drunkards and barbarians did. Wine was meant to be diluted, civilized, made into something you could drink with a meal without losing your senses. The wine isn't fancy. It comes from a nearby vineyard, made by a farmer much like Marcus, and it's thin and a bit sour, but it's wine nonetheless. It tastes of home, of Italy, of normalcy. They eat in comfortable silence, Marcus and Julia. Their children, 2 boys, ages 8 and 11, are there too, though they've been doing their own work all day. The younger one helping Julia with household tasks, fetching water, feeding chickens. The older one was out in the fields with Marcus for part of the afternoon, learning. Because this is how it works, you teach your sons to farm by having them farm. No schools for peasant children. No tutors. Just work, and watching, and slowly learning the rhythm of the seasons. Roman childhood, for farmers' children at least, was short. By age 7 or 8, you were expected to contribute meaningfully to the household. By 12 or 13, you were doing adult work. By 15, you might be married. Life moved quickly when you lived close to the soil. After the meal, there's still work to do. There's always work to do. Marcus goes out to check on the chickens, making sure they're safely in their coop for the night. Foxes and weasels hunt at dusk, and losing chickens to predators is a loss the family can't afford. The birds are valuable, not just for their eggs, though the eggs are important, but because occasionally, on a festival day or when someone is sick, you might slaughter one for meat. Chicken soup. The universal medicine. He counts them quickly. All present. Good. He closes the wooden door of the coop and slides the simple latch into place. The light is fading now. That soft purple light of evening that makes everything look gentler, quieter. Marcus takes a moment, just standing there in the yard, listening. In the distance, he can hear Lucius calling his own children inside. Somewhere, a dog barks. The sound of rural life, unchanged for generations. He thinks about tomorrow. There's always tomorrow to think about. The plowing needs to be finished. And then the field will need to be harrowed, dragged with a wooden frame set with iron teeth to break up the clods of earth and smooth the surface for planting. More work for the ox. More work for himself. And beyond that, there's the pruning of the grapevines. Yes, Marcus has a few vines growing along the south-facing wall of the house. Not enough to make wine for sale, but enough for the family's needs. Grapes were everywhere in the Roman world, even small farmers usually had at least a handful of vines. But vines need pruning, need training, need constant attention. You can't just plant them and forget them. The Romans had detailed knowledge about viticulture, when to prune, how to train the vines up stakes or trees, how to protect them from disease. This knowledge was passed down, father to son, through generations. Some of it was even written down by agricultural writers like Columella and Cato the Elder, though Marcus himself couldn't read those books. He couldn't read at all. Literacy was for the wealthy, for city dwellers. Farmers learned by doing, by watching, by listening. Marcus heads back inside. The house is dim now, lit only by the fire in the hearth and one small oil lamp, a simple clay lamp that Julia has filled with olive oil and fitted with a wick. Oil is expensive, so they use the lamp sparingly. Mostly they live by firelight, and when the fire burns low, they sleep. Julia is spinning wool in the corner, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, the spindle dropping and rising, twisting the fibers into thread. This thread will eventually become cloth, and that cloth will become new tunics when the old ones finally wear out completely. Nothing is bought that can be made at home. Nothing is wasted that can be reused. This is something people often don't understand about Roman farm life, the sheer self-sufficiency required. You grew your own food, raised your own animals, made your own clothes, built and repaired your own tools as much as possible. You went to the market to sell surplus and buy what little you couldn't make yourself, iron, salt, pottery occasionally. But mostly, you lived on what your own hands produced. Marcus sits down near the fire, feeling the day's exhaustion settling into his bones. His hands are calloused and cracked. His back hurts in that deep, persistent way that never really goes away. He's 35 years old, though he looks older. Farm work ages you. The sun, the labor, the endless bending and lifting and carrying. But this is life. The only life he knows. The only life his father knew. The only life his sons will know. He watches the fire for a while, thinking about nothing in particular. Just letting his mind drift. The flames flicker and dance. The warmth is pleasant. Outside, the world is dark now, truly dark in the way that modern people never experience. No street lights. No electric glow. Just darkness, and stars, and the occasional call of a night bird. Soon, it will be time to sleep. To lie down on that straw mattress and let exhaustion take him. And then, in what will feel like moments, the rooster will crow again, and it will be dawn, and he'll rise and do it all over again. Day after day. Season after season. Year after year. This is the boring daily life of a Roman farmer. And in its own way, it's everything. Morning comes again, as it always does. The rooster crows. Marcus opens his eyes to darkness. He can hear Julia stirring beside him, her breathing changing as she wakes. Neither of them speaks. There's nothing that needs saying. This is simply how it begins. He rises, pulls on his tunic, finds his shoes in the dark. His body aches in new places today, the plowing yesterday has left his shoulders stiff. But there's no time to dwell on it. The work waits. Outside, the world is still gray with pre-dawn light. There's a chill in the air, spring mornings can be cold, even when the days are warming. Marcus walks to the stream that runs along the edge of his property. This stream is one of the reasons his land has value. Water. Reliable, year-round water. Not all farmers are so fortunate. He kneels at the bank and splashes water on his face, gasping at the cold. Then he drinks, cupping his hands, taking in the clear, cold water. It tastes of stone and earth and purity. This stream feeds his crops, waters his ox, provides for his family. Without it, this land would be nearly worthless. Roman farmers understood water in ways that many of us have forgotten. They knew how to read the land, how to find springs, how to dig wells when necessary. They built small channels to direct water from streams to their fields during dry periods. Nothing elaborate, not the grand aqueducts that brought water to cities, but simple ditches and furrows that could be opened or closed with a spade. Irrigation, on a humble scale. Marcus has such channels in his fields. In the heat of summer, when rain becomes scarce, he'll spend his evenings redirecting stream water through these channels, making sure each section of his wheat and barley gets enough moisture to survive. It's tedious work, but necessary. Crops can survive a lot, poor soil, pests, even some disease, but they can't survive drought. He heads back to the house where Julia has already prepared more pulse. The same breakfast as yesterday. the same as tomorrow. Variety wasn't something Roman farmers had much of. You ate what you grew, and you grew what would keep you alive. Wheat, barley, beans, lentils, onions, cabbage. Some fruit if you had trees. Meat rarely, perhaps a few times a month, if that. The wealthy in Rome ate elaborate meals with multiple courses, exotic ingredients from across the empire, carefully prepared by skilled cooks. But that world might as well be on the moon for all Marcus knows of it. He's been to Rome once, when he was a boy, and what he remembers most is the noise, the crowds, the overwhelming smell of too many people living too close together. He has no desire to return. After breakfast, Marcus prepares for a different kind of work today. The plowing can wait. Today, he needs to repair the fence around the vegetable garden. Winter storms and time have loosened some of the posts, and if he doesn't fix it soon, the neighbor's pigs will get in and destroy everything Julia has planted. He gathers his tools, a wooden mallet, some rope made from twisted plant fibers, and several stakes he'd cut and sharpened weeks ago, leaving them to dry so the wood would be harder, more durable. Roman farmers were always thinking ahead, always preparing for future needs. You cut stakes in winter for use in spring. You gathered reeds in autumn for weaving in winter. Everything connected across time. The fence posts are set directly in the ground, no concrete, no treated wood, just sharpened stakes driven into the earth. They'll rot eventually, of course, in a few years, and need to be replaced. But that's a problem for future Marcus. Present Marcus just needs to make sure they're secure enough to last through this growing season. He works methodically, testing each post, driving the loose ones deeper with his mallet, adding extra stakes where needed, tying the horizontal woven branches more tightly. It's satisfying work in its way. You can see the results immediately. Loose fence. Tight fence. Problem solved. His older son, Gaius, comes out to help. The boy is 11 now, and getting stronger, more capable. In a few years, he'll be doing most of this work himself. That's the plan, anyway. That's how it's supposed to work. You raise your sons to take over the farm, to continue the line, to keep the family land in the family. Roman inheritance laws favored dividing property equally among all sons, which meant that over generations, farms tended to get smaller and smaller, divided and subdivided until some holdings were barely viable. This is partly why so many farmers ended up as tenants rather than landowners. Their ancestors had owned land once, but after several generations of division, there wasn't enough for everyone. Marcus has 2 sons, which means that someday, this 7-jugera farm will be split in 2. Each boy will inherit roughly 3.5 jugera. Barely enough to support a family. But that's a problem for the future. For now, they work together, father and son, repairing the fence. Here, Marcus says, handing Gaius the mallet. You drive this one. The boy takes the tool, positions the stake, and begins hammering. His technique isn't perfect, he's hitting it slightly the wrong angle, and the stake is going in crooked. But Marcus doesn't correct him immediately. Learning comes from doing, from making mistakes and figuring out how to fix them. After a few strikes, Gaius pauses, looks at the crooked stake, and adjusts his angle. The next few blows are better. The stake straightens as it goes deeper. Marcus nods approvingly but says nothing. Praise is given sparingly in this world. Good work is simply expected. They finish the fence by mid-morning. The sun is higher now, warming the air. Marcus stands back, examining their work. It's good. Solid. It'll hold. Go help your mother, he tells Gaius, and the boy nods and runs back toward the house. Marcus turns his attention to the olive tree. Just one tree, growing near the southern edge of the property. It's old, was here when Marcus's father owned the land. Olive trees can live for centuries, producing year after year, and this one is still vigorous, still productive. The Romans loved olive trees. Loved them in a way that's hard to overstate. Olive oil was everything: cooking oil, lamp fuel, soap, medicine, even perfume for those who could afford it. A single mature olive tree could produce enough olives in a good year to make several amphorae of oil, and that oil was valuable, tradable, essential. Marcus's tree doesn't produce enough for trade, just enough for the family's needs, with perhaps a little extra to give as gifts or use in small exchanges with neighbors. But it's still precious. He inspects the branches carefully, looking for signs of disease or pest damage. Olive trees are hardy, but they're not invincible. Everything looks healthy. The small green olives are forming. They'll be ready for harvest in the autumn, months from now. Another task on the calendar that exists only in Marcus's head. You don't forget when to harvest olives. You don't forget when to prune vines or when to plant beans. This knowledge is embedded so deeply it's almost instinctive. He walks through the garden next, checking on Julia's vegetables. The cabbage is doing better. She must have dealt with the caterpillar problem. The onions are coming up strong, pushing through the soil in neat rows. There's some lettuce, some leeks, a few herbs, coriander, which grows easily and can be used to flavor the endless pulse in bean dishes. This garden is Julia's domain, really. She's the one who plants it, tends it, harvests it. She knows which herbs help with which ailments, which vegetables store well for winter, how to save seeds from the best plants for next year's sowing. This is knowledge passed from mother to daughter, just as farming knowledge passes from father to son. Roman society had clear divisions of labor. Men worked the fields, cared for the large animals, did the heavy plowing and harvesting. Women managed the household, the garden, the small animals, the preservation of food, the making of cloth. It wasn't about one being more important than the other, both were absolutely essential. A farm couldn't function without both kinds of work happening simultaneously. Marcus hears voices and looks up. Lucius, the neighbor, is walking along the path that separates their properties. He's carrying something, looks like a tool. Marcus, he calls out. You still have my scythe? Ah. Yes. Marcus had borrowed it last week to cut some grass for hay. He'd meant to return it but had forgotten in the press of other tasks. I'll get it, Marcus calls back, heading to the barn. This is another aspect of rural life, the borrowing and lending of tools. Not everyone could afford every tool they might need. So you shared. You borrowed your neighbor's scythe, he borrowed your harrow. Someone down the road had a better plow and would lend it out for a day's work in return. These informal networks of reciprocity held communities together. Marcus retrieves the scythe and brings it to the fence line where Lucius waits. Thanks for this, Lucius says, examining the blade. You sharpened it? Needed it, Marcus replies with a shrug. Lucius grins. Good. Saves me the work. They talk for a few minutes, about the weather, about whether it will rain soon, about Lucius's daughter who's getting married next month. Small talk, but important. These moments of connection, of shared experience, are part of what makes the isolation and hardship of farm life bearable. Then Lucius heads back to his own property, scythe over his shoulder, and Marcus returns to his work. There's always more work. The Romans had a term for it. Labor improbus. Persistent toil. Unrelenting work. The kind that never ends, that simply continues, season after season, year after year, generation after generation. And Marcus, standing in his small farmyard, surrounded by his fields and his animals and his life, he understands this in his bones. Tomorrow, the work continues. And the day after that. And the day after that, the afternoon sun is warm on Marcus's back as he returns to the fallow field. The plowing needs finishing. There's still perhaps half the field left to work, and if he wants to plant at the right time, and he does, timing is everything in farming, then this needs to be done within the next few days. He brings the ox out again, harnesses it to the plow, and they resume their slow march across the field. Back and forth. Back and forth. The furrows multiply, one after another, transforming the rough ground into something workable. But today, as he works, Marcus is thinking about taxes. He's always thinking about taxes, really. They're due soon, the grain tax that every Roman farmer must pay. The annona, they call it. The system that feeds the city of Rome, that keeps the empire running. Roman farmers were required to pay a portion of their harvest as tax, usually somewhere between 10 and 20% of what they produced, though the exact amount varied by region and by the whims of tax collectors. For Marcus, with his small holding, this means that of every 10 sacks of grain he harvests, 1 or 2 must go to the state. Just gone. Taken away in carts to be shipped to Rome, to be distributed to the urban poor, to feed the army, to keep the machinery of empire functioning. It's not negotiable. You pay, or men with authority come and take what you owe, and perhaps a bit more for the trouble. Marcus has always paid. His father always paid. It's simply part of life, like the weather, like the seasons. You accept it and plan around it. But it makes everything harder. Because you can't just grow enough food for your family. You have to grow enough for your family plus the tax plus a little extra to sell at market for the coins you need to buy what you can't make yourself. It's a calculation that lives in the back of every farmer's mind constantly. The ox stops suddenly, refusing to move forward. Marcus looks down and sees why. There's a large stone in the soil, probably dislodged by the plow. He unhitches the ox and begins digging around the stone with his hands, then with a wooden stake, working it loose. Roman fields were full of stones. The soil in much of Italy is rocky, and every time you plowed, you'd bring more stones to the surface. They had to be removed, carried to the edge of the field, piled up into those low stone walls you can still see in parts of Italy today. Centuries of farmers, picking up stones. Thousands of years of stones, actually. Marcus finally works this one loose. It's heavy, probably weighs as much as a small child. He lifts it with effort, his muscles straining, and carries it to the field's edge where dozens of other stones already sit. Then he returns, rehitches the ox, and continues plowing. The work is hypnotic. The same motion over and over. Your mind begins to wander. Marcus thinks about his father, who worked this same field. Who probably removed that same stone at some point, only to have it work its way back to the surface over the years. Stones are like that. Patient. Persistent. His father had died 3 years ago, a fever that came on suddenly and took him within days. No doctors out here in the countryside. Well, there were doctors in the nearby town, but they cost money, and by the time you could fetch one and bring them back, it was usually too late anyway. So his father had died at home, in that same bed where Marcus now sleeps, with Julia and Marcus's mother tending to him. Death was closer in this world. More visible. More present. Everyone knew someone who had died young. Children especially, childhood diseases took so many. Marcus and Julia had 3 children once. Now they have 2. They don't talk about the daughter they lost to fever when she was 4. What is there to say? You grieve, and then you continue, because life doesn't stop for grief. Roman farmers were fatalistic in a way. They believed in the gods, made small offerings when they could, but they also understood that the gods were distant, capricious, and that ultimately you survive through your own effort, your own endurance. Fortune might smile on you or it might not. All you could do was work. By late afternoon, the field is finally finished. Every inch plowed. Marcus looks at it with satisfaction. Tomorrow or the next day, he'll harrow it, breaking up the clods, smoothing it. And then he'll plant, probably beans this year, to restore nitrogen to the soil after last year's fallow period. He leads the ox back to the barn, removes the harness, checks the animal for injuries or sores. Everything looks fine. The ox goes to its hay without being prompted, begins eating with that steady, grinding motion. Marcus watches for a moment, then heads to the house. Julia is outside, and she's not alone. There's another woman with her. Claudia, from 2 farms over. They're sitting on stools in the yard, both working with wool. Julia is still spinning, while Claudia is carding, using 2 wooden paddles set with metal teeth to comb and align the wool fibers before spinning. Another dawn. Another rooster's crow piercing the darkness. Marcus wakes, and for just a moment, before full consciousness returns, he feels the weight of every day that came before this one and every day that will come after. Then the moment passes, and he rises. Today is market day. He decided last night, after much thought. The risk of illness in town is real, but so is the need for coins. They're running low on salt, essential for preserving food, for adding to animal feed, for simply making the endless pulse edible. And Julia needs a new spindle. The old one cracked last week and has been barely functional since. So, market day. He goes to the storeroom, really just a small separate building with thick walls and a single door. Inside, it's cool and dark. This is where they keep the grain that's been held back from last year's harvest. Not the seed grain, that's separate, sacred almost, never to be touched except for planting. But the surplus. The grain they can afford to sell. Marcus fills 2 large sacks with wheat. Each sack weighs perhaps 40 or 50 pounds, heavy enough that carrying both any distance would be impossible. But he doesn't need to carry them far. He has a small cart, a simple 2-wheeled affair, all wood, with iron bands around the wheels to protect them from wear. He loads the sacks onto the cart, then goes to fetch the ox. The animal will pull the cart to town. It's about a 3-hour walk, which means leaving before the sun is fully up if he wants to arrive while the market is still active. Roman markets operated on a regular schedule, every 8 days, typically, following the Roman 8-day week. The market day was called a mundane, and it was when farmers from the surrounding countryside would bring their produce to town to sell, and when townspeople would set up stalls to sell manufactured goods, pottery, tools, cloth, oil, wine from larger vineyards. Julia has prepared some hard bread and cheese wrapped in cloth for Marcus to take. Food for the journey. She also gives him a small leather purse containing a few coins, bronze asses and the occasional sestertius. This is their savings, such as it is. He'll need it if he's going to buy anything beyond what he can get by trading his grain. The Roman monetary system was complex. Bronze coins for small transactions, silver denarii for larger ones, gold aurei for the truly significant exchanges that farmers like Marcus would never be part of. Most of Marcus's transactions are still done by barter, grain for oil, cheese for vegetables, labor for labor. Coins are for when barter won't work, when you need something specific and have nothing the other person wants in trade. Marcus kisses Julia goodbye, a brief, unsentimental gesture, and sets off down the road toward town, the ox plodding ahead, the cart creaking behind. The road is dirt, rutted by years of cartwheels and foot traffic. When it rains, it becomes a muddy nightmare. But today it's dry, and the walking is easy enough. Marcus passes other farmers heading in the same direction. They nod to each other, exchange brief greetings, but don't stop to talk. Everyone is focused on getting to market. The sun rises slowly as they walk, turning the sky from gray to pink to blue. The air is fresh and cool. It's actually pleasant, this walk. A break from the fields, from the endless routine. Marcus would never admit it, but there's a small part of him that looks forward to market day. The change of scenery. The conversations. The sense of being part of something larger than his small farm. As he gets closer to town, the traffic increases. More carts, more people on foot. The road widens slightly. And then he sees it, the town walls in the distance. The town isn't large by Roman standards. Perhaps 2,000 people live within the walls, with another 5,000 or 6,000 in the surrounding countryside. But it has walls, old stone walls, built generations ago, that mark it as a proper municipium, a town with some degree of official status. Marcus passes through the gate. No one stops him. No guards checking papers or demanding tolls. Just an open gate and people flowing through. The streets inside are narrow, paved with stones, lined with buildings that seem impossibly tall to Marcus, 2, even 3 stories in some cases. The smell hits him immediately, too many people, too much waste, smoke from cooking fires, the sour smell of the fuller's workshops where cloth is cleaned using urine and clay. He makes his way to the forum, the central square where the market is held. It's already crowded. Farmers have set up their produce on blankets or in baskets. Townspeople are moving through, examining goods, haggling over prices. The noise is overwhelming after the quiet of the countryside, dozens of conversations happening at once, vendors calling out their wares, chickens clucking in cages, a donkey braying somewhere. Marcus finds a spot near the edge of the forum and sets down his sacks of grain. He doesn't need to advertise. People know what grain sacks look like. If someone wants wheat, they'll come to him. And they do. A woman approaches first, looking at his grain critically. "How much?" she asks. "For asses per modius," Marcus replies. The modius is a standard Roman measure, about 2 gallons, roughly 9 liters. She makes a face. too much. The man over there is selling for 3.5. Marcus shrugs. His grain is from last year. Mine is fresher. This is partly true. All grain from this time of year is from last year. The new harvest won't come until summer. But Marcus's grain was stored well, kept dry, and is of good quality. He knows this. She probably knows this too. They haggle for a few minutes, and eventually settle on 3 3/4 asses per modius. She buys 1 modius, counting out the small bronze coins carefully into Marcus's hand. He pours the grain into the basket she's brought, using a measuring cup to ensure the amount is correct. This is how the morning goes. 1 customer at a time. Small sales, small amounts of grain. By midday, he's sold about half of what he brought. The coins jingle in his purse, not a lot, but enough. Enough for salt. Enough for the spindle. Maybe enough for a small piece of iron that he can work into a new tool. Roman farmers rarely got wealthy from market sales. The profit margins were too thin. You sold your surplus for barely more than it cost to produce, and sometimes for less. But it was better than having no coins at all. And in a good year, if the harvest was generous and prices were decent, you might accumulate enough to buy something significant, a better plow, another small plot of land, a dowry for a daughter. Marcus takes a break to eat the bread and cheese Julia packed. He sits on the edge of a fountain, one of the town's public fountains fed by an aqueduct that brings water from the hills. Clean, cold water flowing continuously. This is one of the things that makes Roman towns different from the countryside. In town, water comes to you. In the country, you go to water. He watches the crowd as he eats. So many people. So many different lives. He sees a man in a toga, clearly someone of status, a town councilor perhaps, or a wealthy merchant. He sees slaves carrying goods for their masters, their status evident from their plain tunics and the way they keep their eyes down. He sees children running between the stalls, and shopkeepers shouting at them to be careful. This is the Roman world in miniature. All the complexity of the empire, all its hierarchies and relationships, playing out in this small-town forum. After eating, Marcus walks through the market, looking for what he needs. He finds a merchant selling salt, coarse gray salt, probably from the coast, brought inland by traders. Salt was valuable because it was essential. Without it, you couldn't preserve meat for winter. Without it, your animals wouldn't stay healthy. The Romans even paid soldiers partly in salt rations, which is where the word salary comes from, salarium, salt money. Marcus buys 2 large blocks of salt, haggling over the price but ultimately paying what the merchant asks. It's expensive, but necessary. He wraps the salt carefully in cloth and puts it in the cart. Next, he finds a craftsman selling wooden tools and implements. He examines the spindles carefully, testing their weight and balance. Julia has specific preferences about spindles. The weight needs to be right, the whirl perfectly centered, or it won't spin smoothly. He finds one that seems good and buys it, along with a new whetstone for sharpening tools. His money is mostly gone now. Just a few coins left. But he's gotten what he came for. He's about to leave when he sees something that makes him pause. A potter's stall, displaying various clay vessels. And among them, a small oil lamp, nicer than the simple one they have at home. It has a decorative pattern molded into it, a vine with leaves and grapes. It's beautiful in a simple way. Marcus picks it up, feeling its weight. Julia would like this. She never asks for anything, never complains, just works day after day managing the household, raising the children, keeping everything running. This lamp, it would be a small gift. A gesture. How much? He asks the potter. 6 asses. Marcus has exactly 6 asses left. He hesitates. That money could be saved. Could be used for something practical, something necessary. But sometimes, he thinks, something beautiful is necessary too. He pays for the lamp and wraps it carefully. Then he loads his remaining grain back onto the cart. He'll take it home, save it for another market day, and begins the long walk back. The sun is past its peak now, starting its afternoon descent. The ox plods steadily, unbothered by the return journey. Marcus walks beside the cart, one hand resting on the salt blocks to keep them steady, his mind already moving ahead to tomorrow's work. The harrowing needs to be done. The vines need pruning. There's always something. But tonight, he'll give Julia the lamp. And maybe, just for a moment, they'll light it and sit together in its warm glow, and appreciate something beautiful in their simple, hard-working life. Because even boring lives need moments of beauty. Even farmers need to remember that the world contains more than just soil and sweat and endless labor. The road stretches ahead. Marcus walks it steadily, heading home. Marcus arrives home as the afternoon light turns golden. The ox is tired from the journey, and so is he. Julia comes out to meet him, and when he shows her what he's brought, the salt, the spindle, and finally, carefully unwrapped, the oil lamp, her face softens in a way he doesn't see often. "It's beautiful," she says quietly, turning it over in her hands, tracing the vine pattern with her finger. "Thought you might like it," Marcus replies, shrugging as if it's nothing, though they both know it's something. She kisses his cheek. A rare gesture of affection. Then she takes the items inside while Marcus tends to the ox, giving the animal extra hay as a reward for the long day's work. The evening passes as evenings do. A simple meal. The children chattering about their day. And then, as darkness falls, Julia lights the new lamp for the first time. The flame catches, and the decorated pottery seems to glow from within. The vine pattern throws delicate shadows on the wall. They sit together for a while, just watching the lamp burn. Not talking. Not needing to talk. Just being. But morning comes, as it always does, and with it the return to routine. Today, Marcus must finally attend to the grapevines. He's been putting it off, but the season is advancing, and if he delays much longer, he'll miss the proper time for pruning. Roman viticulture was precise about timing. Prune too early and the vines might be damaged by late frosts. Prune too late and the plant's energy goes to the wrong branches, reducing the fall harvest. The vines grow along the south-facing wall of the house, where they get maximum sun and are protected from cold northern winds. There are 8 vines in total, trained up wooden stakes, their branches spreading in the way Marcus's father taught him. Each vine is different, some more vigorous, some producing sweeter grapes, some more reliable year after year. Marcus takes his pruning knife, a small, curved blade specifically designed for cutting woody growth. The Romans had specialized tools for viticulture. They understood that different tasks required different implements. This knife has been sharpened so many times that the blade is noticeably thinner than when it was new, but it still holds an edge well. He begins with the first vine, examining it carefully. The goal is to remove the previous year's growth that has already produced fruit, leaving the new shoots that will bear this year's grapes. You want to maintain a balance, enough branches to produce a good harvest, but not so many that the plant's energy is spread too thin. Snip. A dead branch falls away. Snip. Another. Marcus works slowly, thoughtfully. Viticulture is almost an art. You need to understand each plant, read its health and the thickness of its stems, the color of its bark, the vigor of its buds. The Romans wrote extensively about grape growing. Writers like Columella and Pliny the Elder recorded detailed instructions: when to plant, how deep to plant, how to prune, how to protect vines from disease and pests, even which types of soil produce the best wine. But most farmers, like Marcus, learn not from books but from observation, from the accumulated wisdom of generations. As he prunes, Marcus notices something troubling. One of the vines has a strange discoloration on its leaves, a kind of pale spotting. Mildew, perhaps. Or some other disease. Grapevines are susceptible to various ailments, and once disease takes hold, it can spread quickly. He'll need to watch this vine carefully. If the problem worsens, he might need to cut it back more severely, or in the worst case, remove it entirely and plant a new one. Losing a mature grapevine is painful. It takes several years for a new vine to become fully productive. But better to lose one vine than have disease spread to all of them. This is the constant reality of farming. Things go wrong. Plants get sick. Animals get injured. Weather turns bad at the worst possible moment. You can do everything right and still suffer losses. All you can do is stay vigilant, act quickly when problems arise, and accept that some things are beyond your control. Marcus finishes pruning all 8 vines by midday. He gathers the cuttings into a bundle. They'll be dried and used for kindling eventually. Nothing wasted. The vines look cleaner now, more structured, ready for the growing season ahead. His younger son, Quintus, appears from around the corner of the house. The boy is 8 years old, small for his age, with his mother's dark eyes. "Father," he says. "Mother says the chickens aren't laying." Marcus sighs. This is another problem. Chickens stop laying for various reasons: stress, illness, age, poor diet, or sometimes for no reason you can identify. The family depends on those eggs. Not just for eating, though that's important, but also for the occasional sale or trade. Eggs have value. He goes to the chicken coop and observes the birds carefully. They seem healthy enough, active, eating normally, their feathers in good condition. Sometimes chickens just have off periods. Sometimes they're molting, replacing their feathers, and egg production drops during that time. It's frustrating, but usually temporary. "We'll give it a few more days," Marcus tells Julia when he reports back. "If they're still not laying, we might need to cull the oldest ones and get younger birds." This is a calculation every farmer makes. Keeping animals costs resources, food, space, attention. If they're not producing, they're just a drain. It sounds harsh, but it's simple economics. A farm has to sustain itself, and that means making hard choices sometimes. The afternoon is spent on maintenance tasks. Marcus sharpens tools: the hoe blade, the pruning knife, the sickle they'll use at harvest time. Sharpening is meditative work. The rasp of whetstone on metal, the gradual refinement of the edge, the satisfaction of a blade properly honed. The Romans understood metallurgy well. They knew that iron needed to be worked hot, shaped carefully, then cooled and tempered to make it hard but not brittle. They knew that a good edge required patience and the right angle and regular maintenance. Tools were valuable precisely because they were difficult to make and essential to have. As Marcus works, his mind drifts to the future. To harvest time, still months away. To winter, beyond that. To all the things that need to happen between now and then. The wheat and barley will need constant attention, weeding, protecting from birds and rodents, ensuring adequate water. The beans will need to be planted soon in the harrowed field. The vegetables will need thinning and transplanting. And beyond all that, there are the larger concerns. The taxes that must be paid. The possibility of drought, always a fear. The health of his family, any serious illness could be catastrophic, could put everything at risk. Roman farmers lived with uncertainty as a constant companion. There was no insurance, no government assistance if crops failed, no safety net beyond what you could build yourself through careful planning and relationships with neighbors. You saved when you could. You maintained your tools and buildings meticulously. You built reciprocal relationships with those around you so that in times of need, help might be available. But ultimately, you were on your own. You and your family against the elements, against chance, against the slow grinding pressure of survival. Gaius, the older boy, comes to sit beside Marcus while he works. The boy doesn't speak at first, just watches his father sharpen the hoe blade. Will the farm be mine someday? Gaius asks finally. Marcus pauses in his work. It's a complicated question. The farm will be divided between both sons, but Gaius, as the elder, might have some claim to the house itself, to the primary portion. Or they might work it together, living as extended family. Or one might buy out the other's share, though where such money would come from is unclear. It'll be yours and your brother's, Marcus says carefully. You'll need to decide between you how to manage it. Will it be enough? For both of us? And there it is. The question that haunts every Roman farmer with multiple sons. The knowledge that each generation, the portions get smaller, the margin for survival thinner. You'll make it work, Marcus says, with more confidence than he feels. You'll find a way. It's not much of an answer. But it's the only one he has. They sit in silence for a while longer. Then Gaius gets up and goes back to whatever task Julia has set for him. Marcus returns to his sharpening. The sun moves across the sky. The shadows lengthen. Another day gradually becoming evening. Julia calls everyone for the evening meal. More pulse, of course. Some of the beans from yesterday, reheated. A bit of the cheese Marcus brought back from market. The hard bread, softened by dipping in watered wine. They eat together, the family, sitting around the simple wooden table in the dim light of the hearth and the new oil lamp. Small conversations. The ordinary exchanges of people who know each other completely. After the meal, Marcus steps outside one more time. The stars are emerging, brilliant in the darkness. The air is cool. Somewhere in the distance, he can hear a fox barking. He thinks about his life. This small piece of land. This simple house. This endless cycle of work. It's not glorious. It's not exciting. History won't remember his name. Poets won't sing of his achievements. But it's his. This life is his. And in its own quiet way, it matters. Because someone has to grow the grain. Someone has to tend the fields. Someone has to do the boring, essential work that keeps the world fed, that keeps civilization functioning. The farmers. Always the farmers. In every age, in every place. The ones who rise before dawn and work until dusk and do it all again the next day. Marcus turns and goes back inside. Tomorrow will come soon enough. And when it does, he'll be ready. Dawn arrives with clouds on the horizon. Marcus notices them immediately when he steps outside, thick, gray clouds moving in from the west. Rain is coming. He can smell it in the air, that particular dampness that precedes a storm. Rain is both blessing and curse for a farmer. The crops need it, desperately, especially now in spring when they're growing most vigorously. But too much rain at the wrong time can be disastrous. It can rot seeds in the ground, wash away topsoil, delay planting, destroy roads and make them impassable. Marcus studies the sky, trying to gauge how much rain is coming and when. This is a skill developed over years, reading clouds, reading wind, reading the behavior of animals. The chickens are staying close to their coop this morning, always a sign of approaching weather. The ox seems restless. He decides to spend the morning preparing. If heavy rain is coming, there are things that need to be secured. Tools should be brought under cover. The irrigation channels should be checked. If they overflow, water could flood into areas where it's not wanted. The thatch on the barn roof has a weak spot that might leak. Julia is thinking the same way. When Marcus comes back inside, she's already organizing, moving sacks of grain away from the walls where rain might seep through, checking that all their storage vessels are covered, making sure the precious seed grain is in the driest part of the storeroom. Roman houses were not waterproof the way modern buildings are. Rain would find its way in through the smoke holes in the roof, through gaps in the walls, through the packed earth floor if it was heavy enough. You learn to live with it, to work around it, to protect what mattered most and accept that some dampness was inevitable. The first drops begin to fall just before midday. Large, heavy drops that kick up small puffs of dust where they hit the dry earth. Then more drops. And then the sky opens up. It's a proper storm. Rain falling in sheets, driven by wind that howls around the corners of the house. Thunder rolls across the hills. Lightning flickers in the distance. The whole world becomes water and noise. The family gathers inside. There's no working in weather like this. All you can do is wait it out. The children huddle near the hearth, watching the rain pour through the smoke hole, sizzling when it hits the fire. Julia continues spinning. There's always wool to spin, and idle hands are wasteful. Marcus sits at the table, using the forced rest to repair a broken basket. Weaving and basketry were skills most Roman farmers had to master. Baskets were essential for carrying grain, for gathering vegetables, for storing things. And they wore out constantly, needing repair or replacement. He works with willow withes that he'd cut and soaked weeks ago, keeping them pliable. His hands move almost automatically, weaving the flexible branches in and out, rebuilding the broken section of the basket's side. It's satisfying work. Something productive to do while the storm rages outside. The Romans measured time differently than we do. They didn't have clocks in the countryside, no mechanical devices ticking away the hours. Instead, they divided daylight into 12 equal hours, which meant that an hour in summer was much longer than an hour in winter. And at night, they simply spoke of watches, the first watch, the second watch, and so on. For farmers, time was even more fluid. It was measured by the sun's position, by the completion of tasks, by the seasons themselves. You didn't work for 8 hours, you worked until the task was done or until darkness made continued work impossible. Time was something you lived within, not something you tracked precisely. The storm continues through the afternoon. The rain is relentless, turning the yard into a muddy soup, creating rivulets that run down toward the stream. Marcus watches through the doorway, hoping the stream doesn't overflow its banks. That's happened before, years ago, and the water had spread across the low-lying portion of his wheat field, damaging the crop. But this storm, while heavy, doesn't seem quite that severe. The water is running off, not pooling. That's good. That means the soil will drink in what it needs and the excess will drain away. As the afternoon wears on, the rain begins to ease. The heavy downpour becomes a steady patter, then a drizzle. The thunder moves off into the distance. The sky lightens slightly, though it remains overcast. Marcus ventures outside to assess any damage. His feet sink into the mud immediately. It's everywhere, thick and clinging. The yard is a mess. But the buildings seem intact. The barn roof held. The chicken coop is still standing, with the birds inside looking bedraggled but unharmed. He walks to the fields, or tries to. The paths are nearly impassable, slick with mud. He can see the wheat from a distance, though the plants are bent from the force of the rain but not broken. They'll straighten as they dry. The beans he was planning to plant will have to wait now. The soil is too wet to work. Planting in mud would be pointless. This is another aspect of farming that requires patience. You make plans, and then weather changes those plans, and you adapt. You wait. You work around problems. You accept delays as inevitable. By evening, the rain has stopped entirely. The clouds begin to break apart, revealing patches of blue sky and, eventually, the sun, low on the horizon, casting a strange golden light across the wet landscape. Everything gleams. The leaves of the wheat plants sparkle with water droplets. The world looks washed clean. Julia prepares the evening meal. Tonight there's something different. She's made a vegetable stew with onions and cabbage from the garden, flavored with a bit of salted pork. Meat? An uncommon addition to their diet. The pork comes from a pig that Marcus and 3 neighbors had raised cooperatively last year. Each family had contributed to feeding it, and when it was slaughtered in the late autumn, they divided the meat. Most of it had been salted for preservation, packed in those valuable blocks of salt, stored in cool, dark places. Roman farmers ate meat sparingly. It was expensive to raise animals for meat. They required food and space that could otherwise go to crops. Pigs were the most common meat animal for farmers because they could eat almost anything, scraps, acorns, roots, waste that other animals wouldn't touch. But even so, a farming family might eat pork only once or twice a month, if that. The stew is delicious. Rich and savory in a way their usual meals aren't. Everyone eats slowly, savoring it. This is a small feast, prompted by nothing in particular except perhaps Julia's sense that the family needed something special. A reminder that life contains pleasures, not just labor. After the meal, Marcus teaches Gaius how to oil and maintain tools. The dampness from the storm makes this especially important. Iron will rust if not protected. They sit together, father and son, rubbing oil into the metal surfaces of the hoe, the sickle, the pruning knife. You have to do this after every rain, Marcus explains. Otherwise the rust starts, and once it starts, it spreads. A rusted tool is a weak tool. Gaius nods, paying careful attention. He's at the age where he wants to learn, wants to understand how everything works. In a few years, he'll know all of this instinctively, the way Marcus does. It will be second nature. The oil they use is olive oil, not the good oil for eating, but the lower quality oil from the last pressing, when most of the flavor has already been extracted. This grade of oil has many uses, for lamps, for tools, for treating leather, even for washing if you're wealthy enough to afford soap made from it mixed with ashes. As they work, Marcus finds himself thinking about continuity. About how his father taught him these same skills, sitting in this same spot, using these same tools. And how Gaius will someday teach his own sons, passing down the knowledge one more generation. This is how civilization persists, really. Not through grand monuments or famous battles, but through these small acts of transmission. Teaching your children how to work metal, how to read soil, how to know when to plant and when to harvest. Knowledge embedded in practice, passed down through time. The light is fading now. Julia lights both lamps tonight, the old one and the new decorated one. The house feels warmer, more welcoming with both flames burning. It's a small extravagance, using extra oil, but after a day trapped inside by rain, it seems justified. Quintus, the younger boy, is already curled up on his sleeping mat, exhausted from the day despite having done no field work. Children have their own way of finding exhaustion. Marcus sits for a while, just resting. His body aches in the usual places, lower back, shoulders, hands. These aches are his constant companions now. They started in his 20s and have gradually intensified. By the time he's 50, if he lives that long, they'll be even worse. This is the price of farm labor. Your body slowly breaks down under the constant strain. Roman farmers rarely live to old age. The combination of hard labor, poor nutrition, limited medical care, and the various accidents and illnesses that could strike at any time meant that reaching 60 was unusual. Many died in their 40s or 50s. Some younger. Marcus is 35. With luck, he is perhaps another 15 or 20 years. Enough time to see his sons grown and married. Enough time to meet grandchildren, perhaps. But probably not enough to see those grandchildren grown. It's a sobering thought. But not a frightening one. Death is just another part of the cycle. You're born, you work, you raise children, you die, and your children continue. The land remains. The seasons continue. The work goes on. Julia sits down beside him. She's finished with her spinning for the day. Her hands rest in her lap, they're as work-worn as his, calloused and cracked, the hands of someone who works without pause. The lamp is beautiful, she says quietly. Thank you. You're welcome, he replies. They sit together in the lamplight, listening to the drip of water from the eaves, to the crackle of the fire, to the quiet breathing of their sleeping son. Tomorrow, the fields will still be too wet to work. But there will be other tasks. There are always other tasks. Tools to repair. Fences to check. Animals to tend. 1,000 small things that keep a farm functioning. But tonight, there's this. This moment of rest. This brief pause in the endless cycle. Marcus allows himself to simply be present in it. To feel the warmth of the fire, to see the glow of the lamps, to sense his family around him. This is enough. This small life. These small pleasures. This is enough. The morning after the storm dawns clear and bright. The sun rises into a sky swept clean of clouds, and everything glistens with moisture. Marcus steps outside and immediately sinks ankle-deep into mud. It will be days before the paths are truly passable again, weeks before the fields are dry enough to work properly. But life doesn't stop for mud. He makes his way carefully to the barn, his feet making sucking sounds with each step. The ox needs tending regardless of weather, regardless of conditions. Animals don't care about your convenience. They need food and water and care, day after day, without exception. As he feeds the ox, Marcus thinks about the animal's age. The beast is getting old, perhaps 12 or 13 years now. Oxen could live to 20 or even older, but their working years were more limited. This ox is still strong, still able to pull the plow, but Marcus can see the signs of aging. The animal moves a bit more stiffly. Takes longer to get going in the morning. Tires more quickly. Eventually, he'll need a replacement. And that's a terrifying thought, because a good working ox could cost as much as 300 denarii, perhaps a year's income for a small farmer like Marcus. It's the single most expensive thing most farmers ever have to purchase. Some farmers tried to raise their own oxen from calves, but that meant feeding an animal for 3 or 4 years before it was large and strong enough to work. Few small farmers could afford that. Most bought young oxen already partially trained, or bought older animals at reduced prices and hoped they had a few good years left in them. Marcus pushes the thought away. The ox is still working. Still healthy enough. He'll deal with replacement when the time comes. No point borrowing tomorrow's problems today. After tending the ox, Marcus checks the chicken coop again. The birds are more active this morning, scratching and pecking at the ground, searching for worms that the rain has brought to the surface. And there, in the nesting boxes, eggs. 3 of them. The hens are laying again. It's a small relief, but a real one. Those eggs represent food, represent value. Julia can use them in cooking, or they can be taken to market, or given as gifts to neighbors in the ongoing web of reciprocal exchange that binds the community together. Roman chickens were smaller than modern breeds. They produced fewer eggs, smaller eggs. But they were hardy, could forage for much of their own food, and were relatively easy to keep. Most farming households kept at least a few chickens. They were one of the few reliable sources of animal protein available to poor farmers. With the fields too wet to work, Marcus turns his attention to a project he's been postponing, repairing the grain storage vessels. These are large ceramic jars called dolia, partially buried in the floor of the storeroom to keep the grain cool and dry. One of them has developed a crack, and while it's not serious yet, cracks in storage vessels have a way of getting worse. The repair requires a mixture of clay and lime, carefully applied to seal the crack from both inside and outside. Marcus had prepared the mixture days ago, letting it mature to the right consistency. Now he carefully works it into the crack, smoothing it with his fingers, making sure it fills every gap. Storage was absolutely critical for farmers. You harvested once or twice a year, but you needed to eat every day. That meant storing grain for months, protecting it from moisture, from rodents, from insects, from theft. A family could survive a poor harvest if they had stores from previous years. But if the stores were ruined by pests or spoilage, even a good current harvest might not be enough. Romans knew various techniques for protecting stored grain. Some farmers sealed grain in underground pits lined with straw. Others used ceramic vessels like Marcus's dolia. The wealthier ones had purpose-built granaries with raised floors to prevent moisture and allow air circulation. But all of them understood that storage could mean the difference between survival and starvation. As Marcus works, Gaius appears in the doorway. "Father, Lucius is here." Marcus sets down his tools and goes out to meet his neighbor. Lucius is standing in the yard, looking uncomfortable. That's never a good sign. People don't usually visit with good news. "Marcus," Lucius says, "I need to talk to you about the harvest." "Here it comes." Marcus waits. "My oldest boy, he's been offered work in town. At the fuller's workshop. Steady wages. He's going to take it." Marcus nods slowly, understanding the implications. Lucius's eldest son would have helped with both families' harvests, as was the custom. Without him, they're one set of hands short. And harvest time requires many hands. The grain has to be cut quickly once it's ripe, before weather can damage it, before birds can devour it. "We'll manage," Marcus says, though he's already calculating in his head. His two sons are young, not as strong or quick as Lucius's boy would have been. They'll have to work longer days, recruit other neighbors, perhaps hire day laborers if they can afford it. This is another change happening across the Roman countryside. Young people leaving farms for towns and cities, drawn by the promise of wages, of a different kind of life. It's been happening for generations, slowly but steadily. The farms remain, but the pool of labor shrinks, and those who stay must work harder to compensate. "I'm sorry," Lucius says, and he means it. "But the wages, it's 40 asses a month. Guaranteed. Rain or shine, good year or bad." Marcus can't argue with that. 40 asses a month is more security than farming ever provides. He'd probably make the same choice if it were his son. "We'll work it out," Marcus says. "We always do." Lucius nods, relieved that Marcus isn't angry, and heads back to his own farm. Marcus stands in the muddy yard, thinking about the changing world. About how things that worked for his grandfather, for his father, are slowly becoming harder, more uncertain. But there's no point dwelling on it. The world changes. You adapt or you fail. He returns to the storeroom and finishes sealing the crack in the dolium. Then he moves on to the next task, checking the wooden handles of his tools for signs of splitting or weakness. A broken handle during harvest could be disastrous. Everything must be maintained, kept ready, kept functional. The day passes in these small maintenance tasks. Marcus replaces a frayed rope on the well bucket. He repairs a broken hinge on the barn door using leather strips and small bronze nails that he'd traded for months ago. He checks the roof thatch, finding several spots where the rain has revealed weak points that will need attention before next winter. Roman farmers lived in a constant state of maintenance. Everything was slowly falling apart, wood rotting, metal rusting, thatch degrading, pottery cracking. You couldn't prevent it, you could only slow it down through constant attention, constant repair. The moment you stopped maintaining things, they began their inevitable decay. By afternoon, the sun has dried the surface mud enough that walking is easier, though the deeper soil is still saturated. Marcus decides to check the far field, the one he'd been plowing before the storm. The field is a mess. The rain has filled the furrows with water, creating long parallel puddles. Some of the soil is washed sideways, partially filling in the furrows he'd worked so hard to create. He'll need to plow again once it dries, recutting the rows. It's frustrating, but not catastrophic. This is just how it is sometimes. You do work, and weather undoes it, and you do it again. Farming requires a particular kind of resilience, the ability to accept setbacks without becoming defeated, to simply begin again. Marcus walks the field's perimeter, checking the drainage. Water is flowing away slowly, draining toward the stream. Good. In a week, perhaps less, the field should be workable again. On his way back, he notices something growing at the edge of the path. Wild asparagus, pushing up through the ground, taking advantage of the rain. This is a gift. Wild asparagus is delicious, and it grows freely for anyone with eyes to see it. He gathers what he finds, perhaps a dozen spears, not much, but enough for a meal. Romans foraged constantly, supplementing their cultivated crops with whatever nature provided. Wild greens, mushrooms, berries, nuts, herbs. The countryside was full of food if you knew where to look. Julia is pleased when he brings the asparagus home. She'll boil it simply, with just a bit of salt and perhaps a splash of vinegar. It will be a welcome change from the usual cabbage and onions. The evening meal feels almost festive with the addition of the asparagus and the eggs from the chickens. There's bread, cheese, the asparagus, boiled eggs, and watered wine. Not a feast by wealthy standards, but by their standards, it's abundant. As they eat, Marcus tells the family about Lucius's son leaving for town work. The boys listen with interest, perhaps imagining their own futures. Could they leave the farm? Seek work elsewhere? Or are they bound to this land, to this life, by duty and necessity and the simple fact that they know nothing else? Marcus doesn't voice these questions, but he wonders. The world is changing. Slowly, but unmistakably. What will life be like for his sons? For their sons after them? But these are thoughts for late at night, not for dinner conversation. Instead, he asks Gaius about the tool maintenance they'd done together, testing the boy's memory, making sure the lessons are taking root. After the meal, as darkness settles, the family prepares for sleep. The younger boy is already drowsy, rubbing his eyes. Julia banks the fire, setting aside embers that will hopefully survive until morning. Marcus checks the door one last time, making sure it's secure. The new lamp burns on the table, its decorated surface catching the light. That small beauty in the midst of ordinary life. Marcus looks at it for a moment, then carefully extinguishes the flame, preserving the oil for another night. In the darkness, he makes his way to bed. His body aches as it always does. Tomorrow there will be more work. More tasks. More problems to solve. But tonight, there's sleep. That deep, exhausted sleep of someone who's worked hard and eaten enough and is, for this moment, safe and sheltered. The rooster will crow before dawn. The cycle will begin again. But for now, rest. 3 days have passed since the storm. The fields are finally dry enough to work again. Marcus rises before dawn as always, but today there's a particular urgency. The bean planting is already later than ideal. Every day of delay means a smaller harvest in the autumn. He eats quickly, then heads to the harrowed field with a leather bag slung over his shoulder. Inside the bag are the beans he'll plant today, dried beans from last year's harvest, carefully selected and saved for this purpose. Each bean represents potential, a plant that will grow, flower, and produce pods containing more beans. This is the magic of farming, really. You plant one bean, and if all goes well, you harvest 50. Roman farmers understood crop rotation instinctively. They knew that beans and other legumes, lentils, chickpeas, vetch, actually improved the soil rather than depleting it. They didn't know about nitrogen fixation, about the bacteria and root nodules that capture atmospheric nitrogen and make it available to plants. But they knew the results. Plant beans in a field one year, and the next year's wheat grew better. This knowledge had been accumulated over centuries, passed down through generations. It wasn't written in agricultural manuals for most farmers, it was simply known, embedded in practice, demonstrated in the rhythm of the seasons. Marcus begins planting, moving methodically across the field. The technique is simple but requires concentration. He uses a stick to make a small hole in the soil. Drops 2 beans into the hole, 2 because not every seed will germinate. Covers the hole with his foot. Step forward. Make another hole. 2 more beans. Cover. Again and again, row after row, across the entire field. It's monotonous work. The kind where your body moves automatically and your mind drifts. Marcus thinks about nothing in particular, just lets his thoughts wander while his hands and feet perform their practiced routine. The Romans planted beans more densely than we might today, but they also expected lower yields per plant. Without modern fertilizers or pest control, each plant produced less. You compensated by planting more, by maximizing the use of your limited land. By mid-morning, Marcus has planted perhaps 1/3 of the field. His back aches from the constant bending. His knees protest. But he continues. The work must be done, and there's no one else to do it. This is what it means to be a small farmer. You are the labor. You and your family. There are no hired hands, no slaves, no workers except yourselves. Gaius comes out to help around midday, bringing bread and water. The boy takes up his own stick and bag of beans, and they work together, father and son, moving in parallel lines across the field. It's companionable work. They don't talk much, but there's a satisfaction in working side by side, making visible progress together. Roman children learn by doing. There were no schools for farmers' children, no separate childhood free from labor. By age 7 or 8, you were expected to contribute meaningfully. By 10 or 12, you were doing adult work. This wasn't cruelty, it was necessity. A small farm needed every hand, and children's labor was essential to survival. But there was also something valuable in this, Marcus thinks. His sons are learning real skills, practical knowledge. They're learning the value of sustained effort, the satisfaction of completing a task, the relationship between work and results. These lessons will serve them their entire lives, whatever path they end up taking. By late afternoon, the planting is done. The entire field is now sown with beans. Marcus and Gaius stand at the field's edge, looking at their work. You can't see the beans, of course, they're buried beneath the soil. But they're there. Waiting. In a week or 2, if the weather cooperates, green shoots will begin to emerge. And by autumn, if fortune smiles, there will be a harvest. Good work, Marcus tells his son, and Gaius beams with pride. They walk back to the house together. Julia has prepared an early dinner, more pulse, with some of the wild greens she's gathered from the edges of the property. Dandelion greens, bitter but nutritious, boiled to reduce the bitterness and dressed with a little oil and vinegar. Roman farmers ate a largely plant-based diet out of necessity, not choice. Meat was expensive, required resources to produce, and spoiled quickly without refrigeration. Vegetables, grains, legumes, these were the staples. The diet was probably healthier in some ways than the meat-heavy diet of wealthy Romans, though it was also more monotonous and sometimes deficient in certain nutrients. After the meal, Marcus has a different task. He needs to pay a visit to the tax collector. Not to pay the taxes yet, those aren't due for another month. But there's been confusion about the assessed value of his land, and he needs to sort it out before the actual payment is required. The thought fills him with dread. Dealing with officials is never pleasant for farmers. There's always an imbalance of power, always the sense that one wrong word, one show of defiance, could bring consequences. But it must be done. He walks to the town as the afternoon turns to evening. The road is busy with other travelers, merchants bringing goods from the countryside, workers returning from day labor, a small group of soldiers from the local garrison on some errand or other. The tax collector's office is near the forum, in a building that also houses other administrative functions. Marcus waits outside for a while. There are several other farmers ahead of him, all presumably here with similar concerns. When his turn finally comes, he enters a small room where a man sits behind a table covered with wax tablets and scrolls. The tax collector is younger than Marcus expected, perhaps in his late 20s, wearing a clean tunic and with soft hands that have never worked soil. He barely looks up when Marcus enters. Name and property, he asks in a bored tone. Marcus Viturius. 7 Jugera on the North Road. The collector consults his tablets, running his finger down a list of names and figures. Yes. Assessed at, let's see, 300 denarii value. Tax due is 60 denarii. Marcus feels his stomach drop. 60 denarii. That's more than he expected. More than he can easily pay. That seems high, he says carefully. Last year it was 45. The collector shrugs. Reassessment. New valuations across the district. You have a complaint, you can petition the magistrate, but the assessment stands until changed. I understand. But, is there any flexibility? The harvest last year wasn't. The assessment is based on property value, not actual harvest. You can pay in grain if you don't have coin. Standard rate is 1 modius of wheat per 3 asses. Marcus does the calculation in his head. 60 denarii is 240 asses. That's 80 modii of wheat, a substantial portion of his entire harvest. Losing that much would leave the family dangerously short for the year. But there's no arguing with assessments. The system doesn't care about individual hardship. It exists to extract revenue from the countryside to support the cities, the army, the empire itself. Roman power was built on the backs of farmers like Marcus, on taxes collected in every province from Britannia to Syria. I'll have the payment ready, Marcus says quietly. The collector nods, already looking past him to the next person waiting. Due by the calends of next month. Don't be late. Marcus leaves feeling heavy. 60 denarii. Where will he find 60 denarii? He'll have to sell more grain at market than he'd planned. Perhaps sell one of the chickens. Maybe trade labor with wealthier neighbors for coins. Somehow, he'll have to find it. The walk home is long and bleak. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, but Marcus barely notices. His mind is consumed with calculations, with worry, with the grinding pressure of survival. When he arrives home, Julia can tell immediately that something is wrong. He explains about the increased assessment, and her face tightens. "We'll manage," she says, but her voice lacks conviction. They both know how thin their margins are, how little room there is for unexpected expenses. That night, Marcus lies awake long after everyone else is asleep. He stares up at the dark ceiling, listening to the sounds of his family breathing, and thinks about his life. This is the reality that lies beneath the pastoral image of farming. Yes, there's the satisfaction of working with the land, of growing food, of the rhythms of nature. But there's also this, the constant financial pressure, the taxes and costs and expenses that never stop, the vulnerability to forces completely beyond your control. Roman farmers had no political power. They couldn't vote on the tax rates that affected them. They couldn't appeal to sympathetic officials, because the official's job was to extract maximum revenue, not to ensure fairness. They were simply expected to produce, to pay, to continue year after year without complaint. And yet they did continue. Because what choice did they have? This land is all Marcus knows. Farming is his only skill. His sons depend on him. His wife depends on him. The ox needs feeding tomorrow, the chickens need tending, the crops need watering. Life doesn't pause for despair. So he'll find the 60 denarii. Somehow. He'll work longer hours, sell more at market, accept whatever terms he must. He'll survive this year, and next year, and the year after that, until eventually he can't anymore and his sons take over the burden. This is the boring daily life of a Roman farmer. Not just the plowing and planting and harvesting. But also this, the worry, the pressure, the relentless demands of a system that takes and offers little in return except the bare permission to continue existing. Marcus finally drifts into an uneasy sleep, his last thought before unconsciousness takes him being the same thought he has most nights. Tomorrow. There's always tomorrow. And the work that comes with it. Morning arrives, and with it, the familiar weight of routine. The tax burden sits heavy in Marcus's mind, but the ox still needs feeding. The fields still need tending. Worry is a luxury he cannot afford during daylight hours. Today, Marcus must turn his attention to something he's been putting off, maintaining the farm's boundaries. Roman law was very particular about property boundaries. They were sacred, in a way, protected by ancient custom and religious belief. Every farm had boundary stones, markers that defined where one property ended and another began. These weren't just practical markers. They were protected by Jupiter himself, or so tradition held. There was even a festival, the Terminalia, celebrated each February, where neighbors would gather at their shared boundary stones, make offerings, and reaffirm the limits of their properties. To move a boundary stone fraudulently was not just theft, it was sacrilege, an offense against the gods. Marcus walks the perimeter of his property, checking each stone. Some have settled deeper into the earth over the years. Others have been exposed by erosion. He needs to ensure they're all visible, all clearly marking the line between his land and his neighbors. At the eastern boundary, where his property meets the land of a farmer named Titus, Marcus finds a problem. One of the boundary stones has been moved, not far, perhaps a foot, but noticeably out of alignment with the others. And it's been moved in a direction that would give Titus's property more land and Marcus's less. His jaw tightens. This could be innocent. Perhaps Titus was digging and accidentally dislodged the stone, then replaced it in the wrong spot. Or it could be deliberate. Either way, it needs to be addressed. Marcus walks to Titus's farm. The man is in his yard, repairing a wooden plow. He looks up as Marcus approaches, and something in his expression, a flicker of guilt, perhaps, or defensiveness, tells Marcus everything he needs to know. The boundary stone, Marcus says without preamble. It's been moved. Titus sets down his plow carefully. Has it? I hadn't noticed. It's been moved onto my land. A foot, maybe more. Well, Titus's voice is carefully neutral. These things settle. Shift with the rain. You know how it is. Marcus feels anger rising, but he keeps his voice level. Losing your temper with neighbors is dangerous. You have to live beside these people, work with them, depend on them. Stones don't move themselves uphill, Titus. It needs to go back where it was. For a long moment, Titus says nothing. Then he shrugs. If you say so, I'll move it back. Today. Today, Titus agrees, but there's something in his tone, resentment, perhaps. This interaction has damaged their relationship, Marcus knows. There will be awkwardness now, tension that might last years. But what choice did he have? To let it go would be to lose land, and land is everything. A foot here, a foot there, over time, these small encroachments could shrink his property significantly. And beyond the practical concern, there's the principle. You defend what's yours, or you lose it. Marcus walks back home, feeling unsettled. Conflict with neighbors is corrosive. It undermines the cooperative relationships that make rural life possible. But sometimes conflict is unavoidable. Roman rural life was full of these small disputes. Boundary disagreements, arguments over water rights, disputes about shared tools or borrowed animals. Most were resolved through negotiation, through the intervention of mutual friends, through the silent pressure of community disapproval. But sometimes they festered, turning neighbors into enemies, creating feuds that could last generations. Back at his own farm, Marcus tries to push the interaction from his mind and focus on the day's work. The wheat needs attention, it's growing well, but some of the plants are being attacked by insects. He can see the damage on the leaves, small holes and discoloration. He walks through the field, examining plant after plant. The damage isn't catastrophic yet, but it could become so if the pest population explodes. Roman farmers had limited options for pest control. They could pick insects off by hand, which was time-consuming and often futile. They could try folk remedies, certain plant extracts or mixtures that supposedly repelled insects. Or they could simply accept some level of damage as inevitable. Marcus decides on a combination approach. He'll spend an hour each day for the next week picking off the visible insects, reducing their numbers. And he'll ask Julia to prepare a spray from wormwood and water, an old remedy his mother used, which sometimes helped. It's not scientific. He doesn't know if it actually works or if it's just superstition. But you do what you can, with the knowledge you have, and hope it's enough. As he works his way through the wheat, pulling off insects and crushing them between his fingers, Quintus comes running from the house. "Father! Father! The pig is loose!" Marcus's heart sinks. They don't own a pig, but Lucius does, and they've been keeping it for him while he makes repairs to his own pen. If it's gotten out and damaged crops. He runs back toward the farmyard with Quintus, and sure enough, there's the pig, a large sow, rooting enthusiastically in Julia's vegetable garden. She's already destroyed half a row of onions and is working on the cabbage. Marcus and both boys spend the next hour trying to catch the pig. Pigs are surprisingly fast when motivated, and surprisingly clever. The animal leads them on a chase around the farmyard, through the mud, past the barn, doubling back when cornered. Finally, working together, they manage to drive it into the barn and close the door. All three of them are covered in mud, breathing hard, frustrated and exhausted. Roman farmers kept pigs when they could, because pigs were efficient at converting waste into meat. But they were also challenging animals, intelligent, strong-willed, capable of causing significant damage in a short time. Many rural neighborhoods had cooperative arrangements for pig keeping, sharing the labor and the eventual meat. Marcus will have to tell Lucius about the escape, and about the damaged vegetables. It will be awkward, especially after the boundary stone incident with Titus. The web of neighborly relationships is feeling particularly fragile today. But first, he needs to assess the damage to the garden. Julia is already there when he arrives, kneeling among the destroyed plants, her face tight with disappointment. "Half the onions," she says quietly. "And the cabbage, some of it might recover, but not all." Onions and cabbage might seem like small things. But for a family living this close to subsistence, the loss of half a crop of anything is serious. Those onions represented meals, trade goods, security. "I'll talk to Lucius," Marcus says. "He'll compensate us." It was his pig. Julia nods, but they both know that compensation in rural economies is complicated. Lucius might offer some of his own vegetables in trade, or promise labor, or eventually give them a portion of the pig when it's slaughtered. But it won't fully replace what was lost. It never does. The afternoon continues with a string of small frustrations. The rope on the well bucket frays and breaks, spilling water. Marcus has to splice a new rope, a time-consuming task. One of the chickens seems ill, standing listless in the corner of the coop. And when Marcus checks the barn roof for the leak he'd noticed earlier, he discovers the damage is worse than he thought. Several sections of thatch need complete replacement. This is farming too. Not the idealized pastoral vision of peaceful cultivation, but the constant battle against entropy, against damage, against things breaking and wearing out and going wrong. You fix one problem, and two more appear. You make progress, and something sets you back. By evening, Marcus is exhausted in a way that goes beyond physical tiredness. It's a mental exhaustion, a weariness of spirit that comes from too many problems and not enough solutions. The family eats their simple dinner in near silence. Even the boys seem to sense the heaviness in the air. Afterward, Marcus sits by the fire, staring into the flames, while Julia spins wool in the corner. "It will be all right," she says after a while. Not a question. A statement. An insistence that this is true, even if neither of them quite believes it. Yes, Marcus agrees, because what else can he say? Roman farmers developed a particular kind of stoicism. Not the philosophical stoicism of educated urbanites, but a practical, earned stoicism that came from living with constant hardship. You learn to accept difficulties without being destroyed by them. You learn to keep working even when exhausted, keep planning even when discouraged, keep hoping even when hope seemed foolish. This resilience was perhaps the farmer's greatest skill. Not plowing or planting or animal husbandry, but simply the ability to endure. To wake up tomorrow and face another day of problems, another day of labor, another day of uncertainty. Before bed, Marcus steps outside one last time. The night is clear, the stars brilliant in the darkness. He can see the Milky Way stretching across the sky, that river of light that the Romans called the Via Lactea. Somewhere out there, beyond those stars, perhaps the gods watch. Perhaps they care about the struggles of one small farmer in one small corner of the empire. Or perhaps they're as distant and indifferent as they seem. Marcus doesn't know. He's not a philosopher or a priest. He's just a man trying to survive, to provide for his family, to protect what little he has. Tomorrow he'll wake early. He'll tend his animals, work his fields, deal with whatever new problems arise. He'll visit Lucius about the pig damage. He'll continue removing insects from his wheat. He'll begin planning how to earn the 60 denarii for his taxes. He'll do what he's always done. What his father did. What his sons will do after him. He'll continue. Because that's what farmers do. They continue. Through drought and flood, through poverty and hardship, through conflict and loss. They plant seeds and harvest crops and live their quiet, difficult lives in the spaces between great events. And the world keeps turning. The seasons keep changing. The work never ends. The sun rises on another day. Marcus wakes with the rooster's crow, as always, but this morning his body protests more than usual. There's a particular stiffness in his lower back, a sharp pain when he bends. He's not young anymore. 35 years of hard labor have left their mark. He pushes through the discomfort. There's no alternative. Romans had no concept of sick days, no disability benefits. If you couldn't work, you didn't eat. It was that simple. So you worked through pain, through illness, until your body absolutely refused to continue. After the morning pulse, Marcus prepares for a task he's been dreading, visiting the fuller in town to have their wool cloth cleaned and processed. Fulling was a specialized trade that turned raw woven wool into usable fabric through a process of cleaning, beating, and finishing. Julia has been weaving steadily for months, working the wool from their small flock. No, wait, they don't have sheep. The wool comes from trade with a neighbor who does keep sheep. She's woven several lengths of cloth, enough to eventually make new tunics for the family. But raw woven wool is stiff, dirty, and not very comfortable. It needs fulling. Marcus rolls up the cloth carefully and sets out for town. The walk is familiar now, though no more pleasant. His back aches with each step. The fuller's workshop is on the edge of town, and you can smell it from a distance. The fulling process involved trampling cloth in large vats filled with water, clay, and most notoriously, urine. Human urine, collected in large jars placed on street corners for public use, was valued by fullers because the ammonia helped clean and process the wool. The smell is overpowering as Marcus approaches. The fuller, a man named Quintus, is overseeing two workers who are literally standing in a vat, stomping on submerged cloth with their bare feet. Marcus. Quintus calls out cheerfully, apparently immune to the stench. "What have you brought me?" Marcus shows him the cloth. Quintus examines it critically, checking the weave, the quality of the wool. "Good work," he pronounces. "Your wife has steady hands." 3 days for the fulling, then another 2 for drying and finishing. 5 days total. Cost is, let's say 8 asses. 8 asses. More coins going out. Marcus negotiates briefly, more out of habit than hope, and they settle on 7. He'll have to come back in 5 days to collect the finished cloth. Roman towns had specialized craftspeople like fullers, dyers, blacksmiths, and potters because these trades required specific skills, equipment, and often unpleasant working conditions that farmers couldn't manage on their own properties. This specialization created interdependence. Farmers needed craftspeople, and craftspeople needed the food farmers produced. Marcus heads to the market afterward. He has a small sack of early greens that Julia gathered from the garden, the parts the pig didn't destroy. Perhaps he can sell them for a few coins. Every bit helps toward that tax payment. The market is busy, as it always is on market day. Marcus finds a spot and spreads out his greens. They're fresh, vibrant, clearly of good quality. But there are a dozen other farmers selling similar produce, and customers can be selective. A woman stops to look, picking through the greens with practiced fingers. "Fresh?" she asks. "Picked this morning." "How much?" "2 asses for the lot." She shakes her head. "Too much." "1 ass." They settle on 1.5 asses. Marcus watches her walk away with his greens, feeling the weight of the coins in his hand. 1.5 asses towards 60 denarii. It's laughable, really. But it's something. He wanders through the market, both because he has time and because watching commerce is instructive. He sees a merchant selling garum, that fermented fish sauce that Romans loved. Even here in the countryside, far from the coast, there's garum. It's expensive though, beyond what Marcus could afford. His family uses salt and herbs for flavoring, and occasionally a bit of wine vinegar. Garum was one of those products that demonstrated the reach of Roman trade networks. It was made primarily on the coasts of Spain and North Africa, then shipped throughout the empire. Even poor farmers knew what it was, though they rarely tasted it. Wealth in Rome was partly defined by access to these luxury goods: fine garum, foreign wines, exotic spices, imported olive oil. Marcus sees a fabric merchant selling dyed cloth, brilliant reds and purples achieved with expensive dyes. The red came from insects, crushed madder root, or imported kermes. The purple, true purple, Tyrian purple, came from sea snails and was so expensive that only the very wealthy could afford it. These colors were marks of status, visible declarations of wealth. His family's clothes are all undyed wool, natural brown or gray or off-white. Practical. Cheap. Invisible. He's about to leave the market when he encounters someone unexpected. A man in military dress, not the ornate armor of an officer, but the practical gear of a common soldier. He's young, perhaps 20, and there's something familiar about his face. "Marcus Veturius?" the soldier asks. Marcus nods, uncertain. "I'm Decimus. Lucius's nephew. I was posted to the garrison here." Ah. Marcus remembers now. He'd known this boy as a child, before he left to join the legions. That was 7 or 8 years ago. Decimus. You've grown. The young man grins. Army life. We're well fed, at least. They talk for a while. Decimus has been stationed on the German frontier, then in Gaul, and now here, relatively close to home. He speaks enthusiastically about army life, the regular pay, the training, the camaraderie, the travel. Military service was one of the few paths out of poverty for rural men. The Roman army paid regular wages, roughly 900 sesterces per year for a common legionary, though deductions for food and equipment reduced that significantly. But still, it was guaranteed income, something farming never provided. And after 25 years of service, soldiers received a discharge bonus, either a plot of land or a cash payment of 12,000 sesterces. Enough to set up as a small landowner, to retire with some security. Marcus has sometimes wondered if his own sons might go this route. Gaius is strong, capable. He could make a soldier. But the thought of his son marching off to some distant frontier, fighting in Rome's endless wars, possibly never returning, it's hard to contemplate. You should encourage your boys to enlist, Decimus says, as if reading his thoughts. Better than breaking your back on a farm. Marcus doesn't reply directly. Instead he asks, do you miss it? The farm life? Decimus pauses, considers. Sometimes. It's simpler, in a way. But simpler doesn't mean easier. At least in the army, someone else makes the decisions. You just follow orders. They part ways after a few more minutes of conversation. Marcus walks home, thinking about what Decimus said. The army is an escape. As an alternative to the endless struggle of farming. But he also thinks about what the young man didn't say. About the soldiers who die far from home. About the brutality of military life, the discipline that could be savage, the wars fought in service of causes that meant nothing to common soldiers. There are no easy paths. Only different kinds of hardship. The walk home is long, and Marcus's back grows worse with each step. By the time he reaches his farm, he's moving slowly, carefully, each motion calculated to minimize pain. Julia sees immediately and insists he rest. She brings him watered wine with a bit of willow bark steeped in it, an old remedy for pain. The bark contains salicin, the same compound that would eventually be synthesized into aspirin, though of course the Romans didn't know the chemistry. They just knew that willow bark helped with aches and pains. Marcus sits by the fire, drinking the bitter infusion, feeling the warmth gradually seep into his muscles. The pain doesn't disappear, but it becomes more manageable. Roman farmers had a whole pharmacopoeia of folk remedies. Willow bark for pain. Fennel for digestion. Garlic for general health. Honey for wounds. Chamomile for sleep. Some of these remedies actually worked, their active compounds genuinely medicinal. Others were likely placebo, but even placebo can help when you have nothing else. As evening approaches, both boys come in from their chores. They've been working hard today. Gaius helping repair the barn roof, Quintus tending the chickens and hauling water. They're good boys, Marcus thinks. Responsible. They'll make capable farmers, if that's the life they choose. Or capable soldiers. Or craftsmen. Or whatever path opens to them. The world is changing, slowly but undeniably. The old certainties, that sons would follow their fathers' trades, that the land would sustain families generation after generation, these are becoming less certain. But tonight, at least, they're together. A family, sharing a simple meal, sitting around the fire in the gathering darkness. The new lamp burns on the table, its vine pattern casting familiar shadows. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. The tax payment still looms. The crops still need tending. The ox is still aging. Titus still resents the boundary stone incident. The fuller still needs to be paid when the cloth is ready. Problems without easy solutions. The permanent condition of farming life. But tonight, there's this warmth. This shelter. These people he loves. Marcus sips his willow bark tea and watches the flames dance in the hearth, and allows himself a moment of something like contentment. The boring daily life of a Roman farmer. Painful, uncertain, precarious. And yet, somehow, worth living.